So what you're saying is that if I want to employ a Moroccan cleaner, I should not be allowed to do so.
That's right, in the same way as...
But surely that's interference with freedom of contract.
Well, we don't allow freedom of contract between murderers and people who wish to commission murder. We don't allow freedom of contract between the suppliers of stolen goods and people who wish to buy stolen goods. We don't allow freedom of contract between someone who's bought a coerced slave and the person selling that slave. In other words, we interfere with acts which involve criminality. And the simple fact is that by employing a migrant, you are bringing in someone who is hostile to our society and who will contribute to its destruction. Therefore, I'm afraid I have to say yes. It is within at least the confines of a limited state that is now a legitimate thing to do.
Yes, but there are libertarians who believe in the beneficial effect of market forces to such an extent that they would allow no limitation on freedom of movement or freedom of contract. And if that does lead to changes in a particular territory, well, that is simply change.
Well, you might say that it's simply change, allowing someone to buy stolen goods. You're just allowing the goods to be distributed and the market to continue working. But that is not the case. Firstly, on the economic issue, there are many economic arguments against migration which are fallacious. Lump of labour approaches which tend to just say, well, if you just increase the supply of labour, the cost of labour goes down. Well, that of course is true in a very general sense, but in fact, labour isn't just a lump. It's not one aggregated entity. It's different sorts of labour. Therefore, the effects of migration are considerably different. Considerably different among different people within the labour market. So there are fallacies in economic criticisms. But in fact, if you look, I think again, the critics of migration have won the argument here. If you look at the migration within the current context, within the welfare state and so on, the fact is, if you look at the crime, the increased crime rates by migrants, if you look at the disproportionate use of welfare services by migrants, that if you're looking at rough and ready aggregate gains and losses, that the economic gains of migration are by no means self-evident and obvious. But that is not the primary argument of the critic of migration. The primary argument is that this is not just a movement of labour. It's in fact an invasion. It's a changing of our society. And for some libertarians simply say, oh, well, it just means our society will change. Well, if you say to him, yes, but it's going to change to a despotism, is that what he really welcomes? Well, I've put this to some people, and I've had a couple of libertarians say yes. I'm pleased to say that most of them are rather more sensible than that, and the majority have said no. But I don't welcome any change that happens to our society. And if that change is one that renders us into a slave state, then I oppose it. The simple fact is, you simply, no honest man can now deny that the effects of migration throughout the world have been universally disastrous. It has simply been bringing in large numbers of people who are hostile to our civilization and into a political order which utilises them to continue the further destruction of that society. In other words, you've got to look at this migration within the context of a class analysis, at the class structure within the nations which are bringing in migrants, and what the ruling classes of those countries are doing with those migrants. And what they're doing is in fact destroying a free society. And anyone who can't see that, quite frankly, is a cretinous fool now.
Yes. There are some radical critics of the current order of things who do take a lump of labour view of this, and they say that the effect of mass immigration is to reduce the wages of the working classes. Now that may seem to be true, but if I go into Starbucks, I get a nice cheap cup of coffee, clothing is very cheap, building work is very cheap. Certainly some people lose from the process of open migration, but many people, particularly the middle classes, do seem to benefit.
Well, again, my primary argument against migration is not an economic one. So even if you could quite straightforwardly established that there was a general overall economic gain, that would not necessarily change my opinion. You know, what does it profit a man, etc., etc. If more widgets are produced, but we're living in a totalitarian state. So my primary objection is not an economic one; it's a political, social one. However, again, we come back to a broader analysis of class issues. The fact is, we don't want a low-wage economy. It's taken the West a good few centuries to drag our populations out of the poverty and starvation of feudal, neo-mercantilist and interventionist, pre-capitalist societies. It's taken capitalism quite a few generations to drag most of the people out of that sort of poverty. And that sort of poverty destroys any real chance of political egalitarianism. It destroys any chance, really, of a liberal society. If people are only, you know, a mortgage payment away from poverty, they're people who can be intimidated. They're people who don't have self-confidence. They're people who don't have independence. People who don't have independence of their employers, of the authorities in society, of the state itself. In other words, they are people manipulable and easily dominated by the state. Do we want that? Just so some middle-class person can get a cheap Eastern European nanny and coffee at a few pence cheaper than somewhere else? My argument is no. We want a free society, and a free society depends upon a high-wage economy and upon people with real independence and autonomy. It is no accident that classical liberalism emerged from social contexts where there were classes, at least sufficient number of people in a number of classes, who were independent. It emerged from autonomous artisans, you know, people like Tom Paine and so on, skilled craftsmen, skilled members of the working class, the middle, you might call them middle agricultural classes of this country, the yeomanry, the small landed gentry, etc. People who had some degree of prosperity and some degree of independence, social and economic and hence political independence. And to create a society, as we seem to be doing, of impoverishment, where people simply as living from hand to mouth, that sort of society, generally speaking, is not a free society, or a society which is easy to get to move into a direction of a free society.